Welcome, Pod.
Welcome back in to the Chris Mathis podcast. I'm your host, and I'm your co-host alongside my co-host, Spencer Mathis, here as we get into another week of what was an incredible weekend for sports, and we got to see a scuffle on the baseball field in Major League Baseball on Saturday. We'll get into that here in just a few minutes, but a lot to get into today in regards to the running back situation across the NFL. Josh Jacobs wanting a new contract. Another guy here in Tampa Bay wants a new contract, and Devin White, linebacker for the Buccaneers, and the quarterback competitions throughout training camp, not only in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask, but also in San Francisco with Trey Lance, Sam Darnold, and Brock Purdy, as well as the competition in Indianapolis with Anthony Richardson, the rookie quarterback out of the University of Florida, and Florida man himself, Gardner Minshew, right here on the podcast. So we'll get into that here momentarily, but I think we got to start off with a bang with a haymaker, Spence. And we got to get into the brawl yesterday, or I should say on Saturday, on the diamond between the Tim Anderson, the shortstop for the Chicago White Sox, and Jose Ramirez, the third baseman for the Cleveland Guardians. I mean, it was nuts. I know that you had an interesting story we just talked about in the pre-show planning about how you kind of saw it. But here's kind of the basis of what happened, Spence. Then we'll get into your story. But bottom of the sixth inning, I got a photo right here if you guys are watching on Spotify or YouTube. It's the bottom of the sixth inning, one out, and it started with Ramirez sliding into second base, and Tim Anderson tapped him. And according to Ramirez, the tap was too much. It was harder than it needed to be. Next thing you know, Anderson throws off his glove, his fielding glove, throws up his hands in that stance right there. You guys can see on the video screen. And then they go at it. And I think Ramirez laid in a shot to the jaw, Spence, on Anderson, knocked him down or made him wobbly. It was crazy, but it kind of reminds me of those times back at Uncle Greg's when you were taught how to hit, and you gave me a right hook to the chin, and I think I was knocked out. I really do. So kind of the same situation there, Spence. Unreal there on a diamond. We saw this a few years ago with Jose Bautista and I'm blanking. Odor. Yep. Odor, I believe was his name. But anyway, Yeah, just a few years, actually like 6-7 years ago at this point.
Maybe even further than that now, because that was the Blue Jays, I think 2014 or 2015, whenever they were on fire.
Yeah, well, here we go. We got another brawl here, and this time it's more exciting because it features Tim Anderson on television and, of course, Jose Ramirez of the Guardians. Talk about your kind of behind the scenes as you found out, and you saw the video on Twitter on Saturday.
Yeah, well, I was working yesterday at the gym from 7:45 to about 5:15 or 5:30. And JC, as you know, walked in the gym yesterday, was telling me about the Nate Jake Paul fight that was going to be happening the same night as the Jose Ramirez-Tim Anderson fight. And we were talking about it, thinking that that'd be a good fight. But then again, you know how these influencer fights go. So I was looking forward to that. Then after I got off my shift, I drove about an hour, took a nap as soon as I got to the place I was going to. And I woke up and I see Tim Anderson and Jose Ramirez had gotten in a fight. And I click on the video because Isaac Pugh had sent it to us on Twitter. And it was Tim Anderson just squaring up at Jose Ramirez, who has kind of been known as a hothead, at least recently, because I was watching the Tampa Bay Rays versus Cleveland Guardians series, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And 2 of those 3 games, Jose Ramirez was having arguments with Wander Franco and then Brandon Lau, who had just come back from his IL stint. And it kind of looked like it was getting pretty heated out there. And J-Ram is one of baseball's best players. He's very far under the radar. One year he had the most extra base hits and the most home runs in the same season. For a guy who doesn't look like he should move that fast, he does. Even on that play, you saw him leg out a double on what would be most likely for a third baseman, a single. So he's a very good player, but to see Tim Anderson get slid under by Jose Ramirez, and then Jose Ramirez got up, was kind of angry about the call, but for Tim Anderson to go out there and square up immediately against a guy like Jose Ramirez, who already has the leverage being the low man, and low man usually wins. But to see him put up his hands like this, not as soon as he put up his hands, you kind of felt like this guy's about to lose this fight, because I mean, it didn't look, I mean, it's there, but I mean, Jose Ramirez, if you get a right hook under him, I mean, he's going to be knocked out cold. And that's exactly what we saw in last night's fight, as Tim Anderson got a right hook to the face while Jose Ramirez was being constrained back by his teammates. Still fired off a punch, and then Tim Anderson fell from that exact stance straight down, like he was knocked out on his feet, which you usually don't see. Usually a guy falls over immediately. He got punched. He was still standing for about a second and then fell to the ground. And then there's a video afterwards of Tim Anderson being helped off the field by his teammates, and he looked like a drunk man at a bar who had just been in a bar fight, had already been drunk, and then was knocked out. That's exactly what Tim Anderson looked like. But, I mean, Tim Anderson also has been a guy who has had some scuffles in the past as well, going back to 2019 whenever he compared himself to Jackie Robinson for breaking MLB's fun barrier, which I would say a bit of a far comparison. But, again, Tim Anderson was one of those guys that kind of broke the shell of how kind of boring baseball was for so many years, because if we didn't have Tim Anderson and how he was in 2019 as a rookie and how good he was in the beginning of his career, we probably wouldn't have guys like Ronald Acuna and some of the other flashy guys like Fernando Tatis Jr. But he started the fight and he ended it in a terrible way and not exactly what he was looking for, because this is probably one of the best fights that we've seen in baseball. And in my opinion, I see this as right up there with Jose Ramirez and Odor, probably back in 2015 now, especially because –
Or Bautista.
Yeah, and Bautista, especially because Tim Anderson's the one that put his fists up wanting the fight and then completely got knocked to the floor. So a fun fight last night, a fun day in baseball. Then again, another guy that was kind of involved in the scuffle limped off the field with an injury. I think it was Eloy Jimenez, who's had a terrible year for the White Sox. And the White Sox have been a team who have been so far down this year. And maybe Tim Anderson was going for the hockey fight style. They're trying to rally his troops on a terrible season, but I think it did the exact opposite. We're going to continue to see the Chicago White Sox continue to fall as far as possible from God's grace, especially after this Tim Anderson put your paws up and get knocked out.
Yeah, that was embarrassing. That was the embarrassing part of it all, is he kind of, I don't want to say, well, yeah, he did. He kind of kick-started the whole idea of a fight by putting his hands up, but I don't know if he necessarily initiated it. What do you think in that regard? Did he initiate it, or was he just ready to I don't know.
He initiated it, because I've seen the same thing with Jose Ramirez before, where he says words to whoever's at second base because he gets there so often. And I mean, he's sliding in half the time. He's probably hitting some of the second baseman legs or going straight under it. But I think if you get a comment as a second baseman or shortstop, and you're at second base after a guy slides under your legs, I don't think that you should be the one to put your hands up. I think you take the comment and you just go, because it delays the game. And in this case, I mean, it delayed Tim Anderson, who probably has a concussion now after being completely knocked out in a baseball game, which even Odor wasn't knocked out. So to see a guy get knocked out at a baseball game, this may be the best fight since Nolan Ryan, whenever he was in his 40s and got charged on the mound and just took that guy head on and knocked him out. So Tim Anderson, we may see an IL stint for him, kind of like we just saw with Anthony Rizzo after him getting Anthony Rizzo got a concussion 2 months ago now, and he's just now being placed on the IL, which I think is hilarious. But I think Tim Anderson is probably going to join him, of course, not in the same IL group, but in the White Sox IL.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, just a crazy situation there in Major League Baseball. I don't know what the deal is. Obviously, the Chicago White Sox are frustrated with how they've been able to play this year. It hasn't been pretty there in Chicago. But, hey, you know what? At least there's some energy with Tim Anderson getting in a bit of a brawl, if you will, in Saturday's game against the Cleveland Guardians. He initiated it and got knocked out right in the jaw. So he'll never forget that. He wore a hook right to the chin, which if you missed out on the video, go check that out. You don't want to miss out on that. It's kind of crazy. It's also sad at the same time that a lot of kids look up to these guys, and here they are brawling over a baseball game. I wonder how many kids now in rec league baseball are going to slide to second base and just ready to go, square up. Come on, homie. And then, maybe not throw hands like that. But, speaking of guys competing, guys going at it, game in and game out, practice in and practice out, preseason game, and, moving forward into the regular season, we got quarterback competitions across the NFL. Starting off with, I think we'll lead off with the Colts. The Indianapolis Colts, they drafted Anthony Richardson high this year. They brought in a quarterback in Gardner Minshew. So you've got these two guys right there on the screen competing in a quarterback competition. And we do know that they drafted Anthony Richardson quite high. What was he, a top 5 pick, I believe?
Yeah.
And they have a guy that's a veteran, and Gardner Minshew, a guy who's really, in my opinion, he's underrated. I don't think that he's necessarily a reliable starter game in and game out, but he does have talent, and I think that, there is something there. So if the Colts wanted to roll with, Gardner Minshew instead of throwing out the number 4 overall draft pick and Anthony Richardson right away, I personally feel like that's the right call instead of throwing your rookie into the fire. But right now, it looks like Richardson has really started in camp and has looked really, really good. He's been mic'd up a time or two, and his deep ball is crazy. I mean, he's throwing that ball. He's airing that puppy out left and right. So, I mean, the guy's he's also put on weight since his combine date. He looks bigger. He's quicker. But still, I just think if you throw this guy into the mix a little too early and you have a guy that's hungry right behind him that'll take that role back from him, and Gardner Minshew, I think that just does so much to Richardson and his confidence moving forward. I think that would be a big mistake for the Colts, even though they did draft him so high at pick number 4.
Yeah, Minshew, his career stats are very impressive if you go search him up. I mean, he's had a very good career so far, and with the Jaguars, he was a good quarterback. They ended up replacing him, of course, with a guy like Trevor Lawrence. In that one season, I think Minshew didn't get to finish the season. They ended up being the worst team in football, or one of the worst teams. The Jaguars get Trevor Lawrence. He's out of there. Now he was with the Philadelphia Eagles last year. He played a game, looked good again. And now I think with the way that Anthony Richardson's college career shaped out, you would kind of, for most NFL teams, you're thinking of starting Gardner Minshew in the first, I would say 4 weeks or whenever their bye week is, you start him there. And if Minshew and the Colts are not above 500, which isn't even going to be a possibility if Anthony Richardson is the starter, if they're not above 500, I think you can get away with starting Anthony Richardson after the bye week. But instead, you're going to most likely send Anthony Richardson out there, who, I mean, his college numbers were terrible. His last couple of games in college were very, very, very good. But again, I mean, he had a couple of years in college where he was supposed to be, at least last year, a Heisman candidate, and he didn't really show any of that at all. I mean, he can run the football. His lowlights are very, very low. He's not throwing a ton of interceptions, but the misses that he has on some of his 5-yard throws are very concerning for an NFL quarterback, especially because in college you're going to have a ton of players wide open. In the NFL, the most amount of separation you're probably going to have is 5 yards, a 5-yard window to hit your receiver 20 yards down the field. So Anthony Richardson being the starter to start the season is looking like what it's going to be, but I don't necessarily think that is exactly what it should be. And again, we have training camp to watch, and the preseason starting up this week. So we'll see exactly who Anthony Richardson is as a quarterback. And I think that with Jim Irsay being the Indianapolis Colts owner, I think he's kind of already made his decision. He was there whenever Peyton Manning was a rookie in 1998 and threw the most interceptions a rookie quarterback ever did. And I think that's the reason why he's kind of not scared to show Anthony Richardson as the week 1 starter to all these Colts fans, because they've seen it before. And his excuse was that Peyton Manning was a Heisman winner in college football. Anthony Richardson was not. And Peyton Manning threw 30 interceptions his rookie year. 30 interceptions is an actual fact. I think it was 28 or 30 interceptions, which is absolutely insane for a Hall of Famer like Peyton Manning. But I don't think you can compare these two guys. I think this is apples to oranges. And in today's day and age, if you throw 30 interceptions, the next season you're not a starter. So it's going to be tough for Anthony Richardson to have to go out there with his owner backing him up maybe a little bit too much heading into the season. And if he makes a ton of mistakes and continues to be the starting quarterback, it's not going to be good for his mental moving forward. And I think if I was the owner, even though the owner shouldn't have this much say in his team like Jim Irsay does with the Colts, if I'm the GM or the head coach, I think I'm starting the season off with Gardner Minshew to start the year. Then if he has a terrible game, you can get away with putting in Anthony Richardson. And again, that would also boost the fans' confidence in the team as well, because it gives them something to look forward to further into the season. Instead, you're starting off the season with your rookie quarterback. And if he sucks the first 4 games, that's kind of what you're expecting for the rest of the season with this guy.
Yeah, and again, if he starts and he plays terribly or not up to par, which, let's be realistic, he's not going to go in there and play great to start off his career. I think that even Florida Gator fans such as Trent would agree with that. I think that right off the bat, he necessarily wouldn't think, oh, he's going to go out there and look like a Pro Bowl quarterback, which, to be fair, Huntley was a Pro Bowler this past year. So keep that in mind, too, when I take a shot like that. But, however, I do think that in terms of confidence, in terms of his comfortability in the offense, in terms of him not having too many expectations on his back, too much weight on his shoulders, I don't think he should be the day 1 starter, no matter how he looks in training camp, no matter how he looks in preseason, because it's a total different ball game. Jonathan Taylor's still holding out. We don't know what's going to happen there. They're without their running backs. I mean, he's not set up in a good situation. He's set up to fail. If you start Anthony Richardson, you're setting up for your 4th overall draft pick to fail right away. Whereas if you throw Gardner Minshew out there, a guy who's been through every scenario, primarily bad scenarios, he at least knows how to handle a game-like situation. And if he loses his job, it's not the end of the world. Whereas if you put your number 4 overall draft pick out there, he looks bad after 5-6 weeks. Fans are calling for the other guy to go back in. then you lose all confidence. And then more importantly, Anthony Richardson loses confidence in himself. And you think, hey, we just wasted a top 4 pick on our quarterback.
Yeah, and I think with Jim Irsay's comments is he's kind of forgetting how much the NFL has progressed since 1998 in terms of first overall picks or first round picks in general. Because 1998, if you're drafting a guy first overall, Peyton Manning's first overall, number 2, Ryan Leaf, and both those guys are going out there to start. That's a completely different game now. I mean, even going back to 2015, you could still say the same thing because the situation that Anthony Richardson is in right now with how bad the Colts defense is, how shaky the Colts offensive line is, and now they don't have a running back is very similar to 2015 with the Buccaneers and Jameis Winston throwing him into the fire with a terrible head coach in Lovie Smith. And I'm not sure how the Colts head coaching is going to go this season. Of course, another first-year head coach for them after Jeff Saturday got his little 7-game run in Indianapolis. But 2023 is a much different game than even 2015 because Patrick Mahomes, this first year, sat down. A ton of quarterbacks over the last couple of years did not start the season off as a starting quarterback, even if you're a first-round pick. We've seen it time and time again. And if you throw Anthony Richardson out, who's probably out of the guys that have been drafted first in the first round, is probably the least NFL ready based off of his college tape. Throwing him out there week 1 in the NFL, I think, is a terrible decision for the Colts. And I think that it would be a mistake for them as well because Minshew at this point in his career is a storied veteran. And obviously teams love him because each and every year when he gets released or whenever he doesn't re-sign with his previous team, he's getting signed immediately because he must be good at knowing the playbooks and he must be a good mentor. And I think that's a thing that Anthony Richardson really, really needs heading into this season. And even if, like you said, even if Anthony Richardson lights up the preseason, it's just such a different game. And I'm sure Minshew will do the same thing.
Yeah, and moving on now, obviously, I think that it is interesting to watch upon there and what happens, what shakes out in Indy with both of these quarterbacks. I think more importantly, a competition that has me intrigued more so than the Colts would happen to be the San Francisco 49ers and Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, and Brock Purdy too. And these 3 guys all going at it. Trey Lance has been up and down this training camp. Now, I did see some reports that he had a better week this week. However, I mean, what a waste of a pick, honestly. They traded 2 picks for him and to move up and took him so highly. And maybe it was 3. Either way, I mean, they gave up way too much for Trey Lance. Then they have Brock Purdy come onto the scene last year, do his thing in the absence of Trey and Jimmy Garoppolo. And then Sam Darnold's brought in this offseason to be a guy as well. And now you have 3 guys competing. It's the 3-headed monster there in Santa Clara, California. And I'm not too sure how you're going to shake this out. I feel like in terms of money and what they're paying a guy, Sam Darnold's the guy. But in terms of talent and stuff they've already seen, proven worth is Brock Purdy. However, he is coming off of an injury this past year. And, you know, it's going to be a little bit different to see how he settles in. We saw in the playoff game, he could not throw the ball down the field. They had to throw out 30-plus-year-old Josh Johnson out there to play quarterback. It's interesting. It really is because this is a Super Bowl caliber team with a great defense, some weapons on offense, Christian McCaffrey in the backfield, George Kittle at tight end, Brandon Ayuk at receiver, Deebo Samuel there too, utility weapon. And then you have kind of a question mark at quarterback, what they're going to do. I don't know. I could see this going 2 different ways. I could see Trey Lance being the guy, or no, I could see Sam Darnold being the guy or Brock Purdy being the guy. But I think Trey Lance is in the backseat right now. I don't foresee Trey Lance winning out this job by any means. I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, the saying that there's a team that's a quarterback away from winning a Super Bowl has never been more relevant than the San Francisco 49ers this year because, like you said, you look at their offense. I mean, it's McCaffrey, it's Kittle. They've got a great offensive line. They've got the best tackle in football. They've got an insane receiving core with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. And then on defense, I mean, you have the best middle linebacker in football, Fred Warner. You have Bosa on the defensive line. You have some great safeties. You have good cornerback help as well. I mean, and they play so well together. And that team, that defense is basically the exact same as it was last year. And last year they were making it so far because their defense was so good. And this year, I mean, it's going to come down to politics with who's going to be their starting quarterback because if you're the GM and John Lynch, you're praying that you're going to get Trey Lance as your starting quarterback because you traded so much to get him in that draft, trading up to draft him. And then he hasn't had a good career so far. Of course, he got injured last year. Unfortunate for him. Brock Purdy came in. He looked pretty good. I mean, you don't have to be a great quarterback to take the 49ers very far just based off of their weapons, based off of their insane defense. You don't have to be great. And Purdy was perfect for that team. And then he gets his shoulder injury or his elbow injury, which could still be an issue heading into this season, even though he's at training camp, which is way ahead of the schedule that we were expecting heading into this season. And then you've got Sam Darnold, who I think in my opinion, is the odd man out just because his only real shine in football, I would say, was the last 4 weeks of last season with the Carolina Panthers when really nobody was taking them serious. And he looked pretty good out there. But I think it's really between Brock Purdy and Trey Lance if we're looking at exactly what John Lynch and the team in general needs to do to save face, because I think Trey Lance has to be the starter if John Lynch wants to feel comfortable in his role as GM, who's done a pretty good job aside from the quarterback position. And in my opinion, I think it's going to be Brock Purdy to start the season as long as he looks okay in preseason to go, just because Trey Lance still hasn't shown that much in training camp, even up till yesterday, the last time I checked on it. But I mean, maybe he picks it up right before preseason. Maybe he does great in preseason. They get to start in week 1. But for the team right now, if I'm the San Francisco 49ers, I think I'm throwing out Brock Purdy to start the season.
I think that if he's ready to go, if he's healthy, he's the only option to go out there and start. And at that point, if he's the starter, if it's Brock Purdy, there's no competition. If it's Trey Lance or Sam Darnold, there absolutely is a competition between those guys and, of course, Brock Purdy. But if Purdy's healthy and he's ready to go, Purdy's the guy. And if he starts week 1, there's no competition in San Francisco.
Yeah, we might be seeing a reverse situation from what the Indianapolis Colts have right now with Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew, where we think that Minshew should start the season, and then eventually Richardson's going to come in, kind of like what we've seen a couple of years in a row with these first-round quarterbacks. With the San Francisco 49ers, you might want to throw out Trey Lance to see what you have in him to start the season, give Purdy some more time to recover, and then you have Purdy come in to be the guy down the stretch if Trey Lance doesn't show a ton of hope. And then, again, if you want to do that, and then if Lance doesn't look like the quarterback for you, you can trade him at the trade deadline for a team that needs a young quarterback. And I think that's probably the route that we're going to see the 49ers go, as long as Trey Lance doesn't throw like 8 interceptions in preseason.
Yeah, I think that would not be a bad idea. I didn't even think about that option, but it is there. And the Niners are so good that even if they do start Trey Lance for the first 3 weeks and they go 1-2, or I don't think there's any way they go worse than 1-2 just with that defense and the weapons they have. So, and the coaching staff they have. Yeah, at worst they go 1-2, and that's Trey Lance playing football, not even playing great football. And you know what you have in him, number one. Number two, you let Purdy get healthy again. So that's a great way to look at it. And one more quarterback competition. Speaking of the three-headed monster, 3 different teams have quarterback competitions. We talk about the Colts in Indianapolis, the 49ers in California, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Between these 2 guys up on the screen right now, of course, that being Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. Well, I should say that's Wofford on the far left. But either way, there is a quarterback competition in Tampa Bay. Baker Mayfield was brought in this offseason to be the guy, in my opinion. He's thrown a total of 7 interceptions through 9 practices so far. That 7th pick came in Saturday's practice for the Buccaneers. So he has turned the ball over, and I tell you what, I've been to 2 of these practice sessions, Spencer, and Friday I went, and he fumbled 2 for sure snaps, maybe even 3 I heard, but I for sure saw 2 snaps that he fumbled. I mean, the guy, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's the heat. I don't know if it's the inconsistency at center with Ryan Jensen and missing time and them throwing Robert Hainsey out there. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know if it's Baker Mayfield just being too risky with the football, taking shots down the field, but he has not been smart with the football whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a guy that hasn't really seen any of this training camp, my one question would be, how many shots and how many chances are we seeing Kyle Trask make? Is he playing maybe too smart at football to not throw really any interceptions at all? And then again, another point that I have here is that Baker Mayfield throwing just 7 interceptions and 9 passes, I think is being kind of taken out of – I think it's kind of being portrayed a little bit too much within the media that he's a turnover machine, because this is, again, training camp. These guys are going to be taking chances. Of course, the fumbles are an issue that you do not want to see in training camp or in the preseason, but 7 interceptions through 9 practices isn't even 2 interceptions. They're not even 1 interception per practice on average. I mean, it's under 1. So it's not like he's over there throwing 2 or 3 interceptions per practice. I mean, 7 and 9 isn't that terrible in terms of how many interceptions you're throwing through 9 practices. And then what I saw yesterday is that a lot of these great quarterbacks in the NFL, like Lamar Jackson, I was looking at Ravens Twitter yesterday. He threw 4 interceptions in 1 practice, and no one really cares about that because, of course, he is already an established player in the league. But Baker Mayfield, I don't think that that's that much of a red flag to throw just 7 interceptions out of 9 practices. And then, again, going back to my final question, you've seen the Buccaneers training camp up close and personal. I mean, how many shots have you seen Kyle Trask make, and is it a ton of shots? Is he taking the same amount of chances that Baker Mayfield, veteran quarterback, has taken to try and look at this Buccaneers offense and try and get figured out before the season starts? Because most likely he's the starting quarterback heading into week 1. Is he just trying things that are kind of what is his read to start off like a snap, or is he just thrown into double coverage on little slant routes and stuff? I'm kind of, that's the thing that I'm most interested about is Kyle Trask actually taking shots down the field, and is he just not threading it into double coverage like Baker Mayfield is? I haven't really seen a lot of these interceptions because a lot of the interceptions that are being thrown for Baker Mayfield are in practices where there's no media allowed or no fans allowed at the practice and just media.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that from what I've gathered, and I was speaking with Zach Blobner on Friday about this, he feels like Trask is taking fewer throws and chances in a double coverage just because he's trying to play it safe. And then on his deep balls, he is connecting here and there, but if he knows that there's not a for sure chance that only his receiver can get the ball, he's throwing it just out of reach of the receiver's grab. That way, if anybody can make a play, it'd have to be a hell of a play, but it would only be his receiver. So if it's not 110% there, he's like leading his receiver intentionally. That way he avoids the interceptions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing for Trask. And you can't really see that big of a negative out of there because the Buccaneers defense is still going to be really good this season. And last year, the turnovers and the incapability of being able to run the football really held this team back. That's why they finished the season 8-9. And the offensive line was terrible last season. Brady was not on his game whatsoever last year. I mean, they were only scoring touchdowns in the fourth quarter, if you can recall the 2022 season. So, I mean, if you're the Buccaneers and Kyle Trask is your guy, and Trask isn't turning over the ball a ton like the Buccaneers kind of did last season and couldn't run the football at all, which really hurt Brady last year because he was throwing the ball 50 times per game. If your quarterback isn't making a ton of bad mistakes, and I think that you're completely fine with Kyle Trask throwing it away from the defense. But then it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for Kyle Trask to kind of show exactly what he's made of, because right now I think, like you just said, and like your point with Zach Blobner is that Kyle Trask may be playing it a little bit too safe, and that may hold him back in the preseason and, of course, at the very end of training camp, which is kind of wrapping up. But I think we're really going to see who's going to win this starting job based off of the 3 preseason games that we get this year.
I think that either way, no matter what happens, I think Baker starts, but I do think that there is a pretty good shot that Kyle Trask starts to see, not necessarily game 1, week 1, but at some point they'll make a quarterback change, whether that's Baker getting hurt or Baker stinking it up or the Bucs realize their playoff hopes are done. I think Jason Light, the Buccaneers general manager, has to find out and needs to find out what he has in Kyle Trask moving forward, because if the Buccaneers have a bad year this year, it's not like they're bringing Baker back. They need to know what they have in Trask, because they're going to go draft a guy or sign a guy, and then they're going to fire head coach Todd Bowles. So they have to know what's there in Kyle Trask.
Yeah, and like you said, I think Baker Mayfield's still going to be the guy starting in week 1. But the thing that kind of worries me about making the quarterback change this year is that the Buccaneers bye week is in week 5. And through the first 4 games of the season, I was looking over it the other day, and I had the Buccaneers, regardless of who's starting at quarterback, going 1-3 over the first 4 games of the year, especially with week 4 coming in New Orleans against Alvin Kamara making his season debut. I think the Buccaneers are going to be a team that's 1-3 at the bye week, and it's going to kind of depend on how well Baker Mayfield is at protecting the football. And if he's not protecting the football at all, Dave Canales has chirped and preached that this team needs to be safe with the football and they need to be able to run the football. And if you're not safe with the football, then you're going to get less chances to run the football, less chances to control the clock, and your defense is going to be on the field all the time. And if Baker Mayfield's out here, I think if it's week 4 and he has 7 interceptions by week 4, we may see the change after the bye week, depending on how Dave Canales feels. But for that same point, I think the Buccaneers would much rather their bye week come like week 7 or week 8 to really get a definitive view at Baker Mayfield. Instead, you're going to have a tough choice come week 5 when, at best, I believe the Buccaneers will be 1-3.
Now, I do know that there are a lot of Buccaneer fans watching this right now. You guys can join in, leave a comment down below, tweet us at TCM_pod, message us on Instagram. We always reply. We appreciate you guys. We have a lot of great followers and fans out there that keep up with this. Who would you guys like to see week 1? Is there an option for Kyle Trask to truly start? Even if you're a Colts fan on the flip side, would you want Gardner Minshew to be the guy? Or are you sitting here thinking, hey, we drafted Richardson so high at number 4, let's start Richardson? What about San Francisco 49er fans? Tweet us, leave a comment down below, and we will definitely get back to you guys. As always, thanks for checking it out. Next week, we'll get more into the running back situation, Josh Jacobs, and another contract situation, more contract talk and chatter here in Tampa Bay with linebacker Devin White. So don't miss out, and we appreciate you guys telling a friend about the podcast.